He had already loaded the bike onto the flatbed when the thought crossed his mind that it was worth more as parts than as a project, and he had too many projects already. The donor cycle had been sitting behind the shop for 11 years beneath a tarp that mice had gotten into, and the frame was bent in 3 places he could see, and probably 1 he couldn't. Nobody was going to fix it. He was going to part it out, sell the engine if the engine was good, and let the rest of it go. It was not a decision that required more than 30 seconds. He killed the flatbed's lights and went inside to eat dinner with his daughter. Meredith Voss had just dismantled the 3rd board member to vote against her restructuring plan in as many weeks, and she was standing at the window of her 44th floor office, looking down at the street below, trying to remember when the last time was that she had eaten a meal sitting down. The answer was 14 days ago. Her assistant had placed a note on her desk that said the Callaway estate lawyers had finally responded, and she had not opened the note yet. And the reason she had not opened it was that she already knew what it would say, and she needed 5 more minutes of not knowing. Her father's motorcycle was gone. It had been gone for 7 years. It was the thing her money could not find, and her lawyers could not recover, and her power had never once touched. He was 31 miles away, loading it onto a flatbed, and the tarp was still on it, and he had not looked at the serial number yet. Marcus Reyes had been running the shop on Delancey Road since the year his daughter Lily was born, which was the same year the rest of his life had ended, and those 2 facts had always sat side by side in him, the way 2 truths can sit without canceling each other out. He was 39. The shop was 1,200 square feet of honest work, and the walls held 40 years of the Reyes family's accumulated knowledge. Hand-labeled parts bins, a crankshaft cross-section his father had drawn freehand in 1987, and a clipboard by the door where the current work orders lived. The clipboard's top 2 sheets were for a 1971 Saab Bantam commissioned by a collector whose name appeared twice in Sotheby's recent auction records, and below that, a vintage Triumph restoration for a retired senator who sent his personal assistant to drop it off and never came himself. The outside of the shop suggested a man who fixed motorcycles to pay rent. The inside suggested a man who fixed motorcycles the way a surgeon repairs a heart, with the understanding that this particular object, at this particular moment in its mechanical life, is irreplaceable, and the hands that touch it are accountable for what happens next. Lily was 7. She had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and she was sitting on the workbench with her shoes off and a brass compass in her left hand that she turned over and over without looking at it, the way someone fingers a coin without counting it. The compass had belonged to her mother. It had been in her mother's jacket pocket on the night the drunk driver ran the light at 4th and Elm, and when Marcus had arrived at the hospital 11 minutes after the call. Because he had been at the shop, always at the shop, which was a fact he had never fully put down. The nurse had pressed it into his hand in a small plastic bag. He had given it to Lily on her 4th birthday because she asked where her mother was, and he didn't have a better answer than the compass. It always points home, he had told her. She had held it like a promise ever since. The ticking clock was on the board behind his desk, written in marker, $94,000. 41 days, the 2nd mortgage payment he had missed, and the 3rd would trigger foreclosure on the property his father had paid off in 1994. The reason was a contract dispute with a distributor who had stopped paying invoices in June and hired a lawyer in July, and Marcus did not have a lawyer because he had not anticipated needing one, which was the kind of thing that happened to people who believed that doing good work was sufficient protection against the world. He spent 10 minutes with Lily after dinner. She showed him that the compass was pointing at her shoe, placed on the far side of the workbench, and said she thought it might be broken, because home was usually over there, and her shoe was not home. He said the compass was not broken. She said that was a relief. He kissed the top of her head, turned off the shop light, and did not sleep. 41 miles away, in a building where the lights never fully went off, Meredith Voss opened the note. The Callaway estate lawyers had written to inform her that the motorcycle registered under her father's name, a 1969 Triumph Bonneville T120, serial number TR4148882F, had been legally auctioned as part of a storage unit liquidation in Harlan County 4 years ago. The chain of title after that point was unclear. The motorcycle was, in the legal sense, gone, not stolen. Not destroyed. Simply no longer traceable. She stood in her office for 6 minutes after reading this, her hand flat on the desk, her eyes on the word unclear, which was doing a great deal of work in one sentence. Her father had taught her to ride on that motorcycle in an empty parking lot on a Saturday morning when she was 15. His hands over hers on the grips, saying the throttle was a conversation, not a command. She had not ridden since his funeral, 3 years ago. The same year she had acquired 4 companies before noon, on a Tuesday, and gone home to curtains that were always closed, and 8 standing at the sink. She put the note in her desk drawer. She shut the drawer. She picked up the next file. Route 9 westbound was empty at 6:15 in the morning, which was the only time Marcus ever took the Bisa out on the road, because the collector wanted proof of street behavior, and Marcus believed in completing what he said he would complete. He had the bike running perfectly. He knew it was running perfectly, the way he knew most things about machines, not through instruments, but through a quality of vibration that came up through the handlebars at certain RPMs. A harmonic that meant everything downstream was communicating correctly. He was 2 miles from the shop when the van ran the light at the junction of Route 9 and Persimmon Creek Road and caught the rear quarter of a slate-gray Mercedes C300 that had been proceeding legally through the green. He heard the impact before he saw it. The impact had a particular sound, low frequency, compressed, with a secondary scatter of smaller sounds, and he identified it as a rear-quarter collision at moderate speed before he had fully processed what he was looking at, which was a silver van skewed across the intersection and a gray sedan with its rear bumper folded into the wheel well and steam beginning to rise from the undercarriage. He pulled the Psa to the curb, put the kickstand down with his boot, without looking, and walked toward the Mercedes. She was standing outside it, out on her own, not visibly hurt. She was in a charcoal blazer and heels on wet asphalt, looking at the rear wheel with the expression of someone running a calculation they dislike. He registered, heels wrong for slick asphalt, phone unlocked, and calculating how late, rear wheel no longer sitting flat. The subframe had taken the impact. She looked at him the way people look at someone arriving from a direction they weren't watching. Her eyes went to the motorcycle at the curb. Vintage, immaculate, not a commuter. Then to his hands, calloused at every knuckle and stained with valve-grinding compound. Then to his jacket, flannel worn through at the left elbow, in a crescent that comes only from years at a workbench. She assigned him a category. The category was, not helpful. He squatted next to the wheel well, not touching, and listened. 2 seconds. His head tilted left by maybe 4 degrees. The subframe's cracked, he said. Not the wheel. You could drive it a mile on the wheel. The subframe will let go without warning, probably at the first significant bump, and when it does the rear quarter drops into the tire and you lose steering completely. You cannot drive this car. She looked at him. You can tell that without touching it. Yes. The words she said next came out before she decided to. She heard it arrive in the air between them and could not take it back. How? He did not answer the how. He was already looking at the van driver, who had gotten out and was on his phone, and he said, without looking back at her, "Do you want me to call someone? Or do you have it?" She wanted him to leave. He had a concrete reason to stay, which was the psa, which he could not legally ride back to the shop until the road was clear and the collision was reported, and which he was not going to leave on the verge of Route 9 unattended, and they both understood this without saying it. Her question was still in the air between them, unanswered, and she could feel it there, which was an unusual sensation for a person who had not left a question unanswered in a professional context for 11 years. The tow truck took 40 minutes. He sat on the guardrail with a thermos from the Bisa's saddlebag, which she noted, and answered when she spoke, and was otherwise quiet in a way that was not uncomfortable, which was something she did not have a ready category for. She told him she was going to miss a 7:15 call, and he said, without looking, "Is it the kind that starts without you, or the kind where you're the reason for it?" And she said the second kind, and he said, "Then they'll wait." The tow truck driver knew him. They spoke for 30 seconds in the shorthand of people who have worked the same roads for years. She filed this without examining it. He said the Bisa had a passenger peg. She said she was not getting on a motorcycle on a work morning. He said that was reasonable. The tow truck pulled away. She was standing on wet asphalt in heels with 4% battery and no car. She got on the motorcycle. The Berkshires in October smell like wet leaves and cold metal, and something underneath that she did not have a name for until she recognized it as the same smell as her father's garage on Saturday mornings. She had not been on a motorcycle in 3 years, and the engine did not feel the way she expected, which was loud. It felt more like a conversation. The throttle was a conversation, not a command, and she thought about this for 11 minutes without understanding why it was sitting in her chest the way it was. He pulled into the shop lot at 7:08, and that was when she saw the girl. Lily was sitting on the step outside the shop door with her shoes on, her backpack beside her, the compass in her left hand. She was 7 years old, and she was looking at the motorcycle with the specific, focused attention of someone who has learned to notice the things adults walk past. "The lady's heels are wrong for the pegs," Lily said, to no one in particular. Meredith stepped off the bike. She looked at the child. She said, in the tone she used in boardrooms with people she did not know well, "I'm aware." Lily considered this. She nodded, as though the answer had confirmed something she already suspected. "Dad says you can tell a lot about a person by what they do when they're lost," she said. "Are you lost?" Meredith opened her mouth. Nothing came. Lily looked at her with the undefended patience of a child who has never been trained to spare adults from honest questions, and waited. "I suppose I am," Meredith said, and the words came out in a register she hadn't used in 3 years. Not since before she'd learned to say things like that in the tone that means nothing. Lily nodded again, satisfied. "The compass doesn't always fix it," she said, "but it helps to know where home is." She went inside to get her backpack's second strap. Meredith stood in the lot. Marcus was pulling the Bisa around to the side of the building, not watching. She stood for 2 full seconds in the October air and felt something she could not name shift in her chest. The way a bone settles that has been held wrong for too long, and did not know what to do with the feeling, and did not try to name it, and that was, she would think later, the first honest thing she had done in a very long time. Lily's bus left at 7:40. Marcus watched it go. He poured a second coffee and offered her one, and she said yes before considering whether she had time. because she had no car and 4% battery and her assistant was arranging a pickup, and she had nothing in her hands to do, which was a condition she had not been in voluntarily in 11 years. He did not fill the silence. This, she would later understand, was the thing that finally cracked her armor. Not the impossible diagnosis on the road, not the child and her compass. The silence. She had trained everyone around her to fill silence with updates and asks, and he sat at the workbench with his coffee and filled it with nothing. And after 4 minutes she heard herself say, "Where did you learn that?" "The subframe." He said, still looking at the clipboard, "The frame speaks in harmonics." Subframe compromised, the harmonic drops about 30 hertz, and there's a secondary resonance that doesn't belong. You listen for the one that doesn't belong. She said, "That's something you learn from years or from school." He said both, and did not add anything. She looked at his clipboard. The top sheet held a name she recognized from a Sotheby's auction she had attended in 2019. She stayed on the name half a second too long. She decided she had imagined it. She did not ask. Her assistant called. She said 30 more minutes. She sat with the second coffee and did not check her email. He was working on the PSA now, left panel off, hands in the engine with the unhurried precision of someone who does not need to think about the steps anymore. She watched him and thought about what a person looks like when they are exactly where they are supposed to be, and realized she was not certain she knew that look from personal experience. At 8:47, a silver Range Rover pulled into the lot. The man who got out of the Range Rover was Raymond Calloway, and she recognized him before he had fully closed the door. Because Raymond Calloway was her father's estate lawyer and the person whose firm had sent the note about the motorcycle the previous evening. And he was also, she now understood, in the space between one breath and the next, connected to her in a way she had not known until this moment, and had not been meant to know. He had not seen Marcus yet. He was walking toward her with the wide, settled authority of a person who fills rooms through practice, his cuffs straight from having run 2 fingers along each one as he closed the car door, adjusting them as though they might have shifted in the 12 steps between the vehicle and the shop. He addressed her by her first name, which she had not offered. "Meredith, what a coincidence. I was in the area." He did not look at Marcus. He did not acknowledge Marcus. He said, still to her, "I hope you got my note. Terrible news about the motorcycle. These storage unit situations, the chains of title become impossible to, Mr. Calloway," Marcus said. He said it at normal volume. He did not raise it. If anything, his voice dropped a register between the first syllable and the last, and the room, which had been holding its breath without knowing it, heard the drop. Calloway turned. He looked at Marcus the way he had looked at the car door, as an obstacle between him and where he was going. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "The Cayman account registered under your sister's name received 6 wire transfers between February and September of the year your firm was appointed administrator of the Voss estate," Marcus said. He was looking at the PSA while he spoke. He had not put down the wrench. The authorization codes on 4 of those transfers matched the routing signature on the liquidation documents for the Voss personal property. The motorcycle was among that property. The SEC's Elder Financial Abuse Division has an open interest in estate administrator misconduct that began exactly 18 months ago. He set the wrench on the workbench. He picked up the clipboard. He said, without inflection, "I'd suggest you speak to your own counsel before you make another move." Calloway had stopped moving. He was standing in the center of the shop with his cuffs perfectly straight. And then he was not straightening his cuffs. His right hand was at his side. Something in the center of his posture had gone out. Quietly, the way a tire goes flat in the night, not dramatically, not with a sound, just the gradual, total loss of what had been holding it up. He looked at Meredith once. She did not look back. He left through the same door he had entered, and the sound of the Range Rover's engine turning over was the last thing he contributed to the morning. Meredith stood in the shop. The door was still. The motorcycle sat in the October light from the high window, its engine open and patient. She was aware of her own breathing, of 3 full minutes of silence, of the question she needed to ask that she was not yet able to form, and of the man across from her still holding the clipboard waiting for nothing, which was, in some way she could not articulate, the most frightening thing that had happened to her in some time. She did not go back to the office that morning. She told her assistant to reschedule everything. She drove to the county records office with the partial information Marcus had named, the routing signature, the date range, the account jurisdiction, and the records clerk found her what she needed in 40 minutes. The Voss estate's personal property liquidation had been overseen entirely by Calloway's firm in the 14 months after her father's death, during which time her brother was contesting the will in probate, and she had been in Hong Kong closing a deal she now remembered as the one that got her on the Forbes list, and about which she could not locate a single. The liquidation generated $2.3 million in documented sales. The motorcycle had been documented as sold for $400 to a private buyer, who had then sold it 8 months later for $22,000 at auction, and the private buyer's name was a shell company registered in Delaware, with Calloway's firm's address on the filing. She sat in the parking lot and looked at the document for a long time. Then she drove back to the shop. He was outside when she pulled in, and he looked at her face and said nothing, because her face said enough. "I need to show you something," she said. "I know," he said. He drove her to Harlan County. 40 minutes on Route 9, then county roads that thinned into the silence of land that used to mean something and is now only land. He pulled into the lot of an abandoned storage facility, its metal roll doors rusted open, its pavement cracked through with grass, and parked, and she followed him to Unit 14. The unit was empty. He stood in the doorway and looked at the concrete floor and said, "In the same flat register he used for everything else, your father's lawyer hired me in the first year after he died to assess the estate's vehicles. I was doing estate asset audits then, private collections, corporate fleet, high-value inventory. I had a firm." He paused, not for drama, but because the next sentence required care. "Calloway told me the motorcycle had been disposed of before I arrived. I wrote it up as absent. I didn't look hard enough. A few months later I found the auction listing and saw the serial number. She said TR414882F. Yes, she understood now what he had been carrying. 4 years of it. Alone, in a 1,200-square-foot shop, with a daughter and a clipboard and a $94,000 clock, holding the knowledge that a dead man's most important possession had been stolen by the man hired to protect it. He had not known how to deliver this. And so he had held it. "Why didn't you contact me? I didn't know if you'd want to know." "And now?" "Now," he said, "you drove to Harlan County and got out of the car." The field behind the storage units was still. The afternoon light was thin and silver the way it gets in the Berkshires in October, when the day is deciding whether to become evening. And she stood in it and understood that she had been looking at him upside down from the moment she categorized him at the edge of a wet road, and that every conclusion she had drawn from that moment forward had been wrong in direction, which was the direction of not looking hard enough. She called the Sex Financial Abuse Division from the parking lot at 4:17 that afternoon, without her lawyer, using her own name and the routing numbers she had found that morning. The agent knew about Calloway already. Case number, jurisdictions, open threads, and said he would need her in person by 9 the following day. She said she would be there. Raymond Calloway arrived at the federal building in Hartford 3 days later, escorted by 2 people who were not his assistants. The agent who processed him later described him as the quietest man he had ever seen walk through that door, and noted that he did not straighten his cuffs once. The motorcycle was still in Marcus's shop. He had not scrapped it. He had realized, somewhere between loading it and unloading it, that he was not going to scrap it, and had put the tarp back on and let it sit, and had not examined the reason closely, because he was not the kind of person who examined things before they were ready. She came back 4 days after Harlan County with 2 lawyers, 1 notary, and probate court documents reinstating her claim to her father's estate assets. He looked at the lawyers and looked at her and said, "Give me a minute," and went inside and took the tarp off. The lawyers waited outside. She came in. She put her hand on the fuel tank. He had been working on it in the weeks since Harlan. The frame was straight, not unmarked. The metal still held its history in the grain, but straight and true, and the welds were invisible. The chrome was back to mirror. The engine rebuilt to specification. The paint was the original blue, matched from the factory code, and it was the same blue her father had pointed to in a photograph when she was 12 and said, "That right there is the color of a Saturday." She said very quietly, "You rebuilt it?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He set down a wrench that didn't need setting down. "Because it was your father's." The notary came in, the documents were signed, the title transferred. The lawyers left. She stood with the motorcycle, and he stood at the workbench, and the $94,000 was still on the board, 31 days now, and she looked at it and said, "What's the ticking clock?" He said, "Nothing I can't handle." She said, "Marcus." He looked up. "I have a retainer with a firm that handles estate administrator misconduct. Fees deducted from recovered assets. Calloway's Cayman account holds approximately $800,000 in commingled estate funds. When the SEC releases it, your firm's unpaid invoices will be among the first settled. It won't take 31 days. He looked at her. She said, "I know you never would have asked." No. She left at 4. Lily's bus came at 4:15. He was in the lot when it pulled in, which was where he always was, and Lily got off and said she had learned today that magnetic north and true north were not the same thing, and therefore the compass pointed toward something real, but not necessarily fixed. He said that was correct. She thought about it and said she supposed that was both reassuring and concerning. He said that was also correct. She took his hand, and they went inside. 6 months later. Lily was in the lot on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on the back of the Triumph Bonneville that was not moving, making engine sounds that were not accurate, but were enthusiastic. The brass compass was in her left hand, pointed at various corners of the lot, its findings reported to no one in particular. She had decided sometime in the fall to name it Franklin, because she had been studying Benjamin Franklin and felt he seemed like a person who would appreciate being pointed at things. The shop had 3 new bays. The foreclosure notice was gone. The clipboard by the door held a name that had appeared twice in last year's Goodwood Revival program, and below it, a letter from a maritime museum in Connecticut about a vintage racing motorcycle that needed, in their assessment, a specialist. Meredith's office had curtains that were open. This was the first thing that had changed. She had noticed it one morning in January and realized she did not remember deciding to open them, and had left them open. And the city below had turned out to look like a place where people were simply going about their days. There was a pot on the stove on Saturday mornings now, mud from small boots on the hallway floor. A 7-year-old's opinion on curtain color, delivered without being asked. The fortress was not gone. It was simply no longer sealed. He had not moved. She had not asked him to. The hand near the other hand was near it still, and neither had moved away, and they both knew it, and neither named it. It was enough. It was the thing she had not known she was looking for when she stood in her office with her hand flat on the desk and her eyes on the word unclear. The title had been clear the whole time. She simply had not known where to. Some things return to you not because you found them, but because someone spent 4 years making sure they would be ready when you did. If someone spent 4 years quietly restoring something that belonged to your father, something that cost them more than they ever said, would you have been ready to walk through that door? Or would you still have been running? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that the things we think are lost sometimes just need a pair of honest hands. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe. We'll be here. We read every one.